I'm ready to stop screen sharing now. So, Erika McCalpine is the director of the OSU-Cascades Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Laboratory. She's also a business instructor and leads the Business Administration program at Oregon State University Cascades, where she teaches courses in human resources, business ethics, leadership, and entrepreneurship. Erika is a recognized advocate for advancing social equity and inclusion within OSU and weaves those themes throughout her teaching and in her work with students. In 2019, she received the OSU Francis Dancy Hooks Award for building bridges across cultures and showing courage in promoting diversity. She received the OSU Cascades Diversity Award in 2019. Prior to joining OSU Cascades, Erika taught at the University of Alabama. Erika also grew up in Alabama. If you're familiar with Brian Stevenson's book, Just Mercy, and the movie Just Mercy, Erika's hometown is a mere 40 miles from Monroeville, Alabama, where the false conviction and eventual exoneration of Walter McMillan took place. Since moving to Bend 3 years ago, Erika has immersed herself in community service. Since 2019, she's been on the board of the Volunteers in Medicine Clinic and of the City Club of Central Oregon since 2020. She is the co-founder of Love Your Neighbor, a grassroots effort that encourages community members to appreciate and accept fellow residents from diverse backgrounds. She was named the Source Weekly Woman of the Year in 2019. Erika often reflects on all that she's been blessed with since moving here, and she's very grateful to be part of this community. And Erika, we are very grateful to have you as part of our community. Please, everyone, help me welcome Erika McCalpine.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you for inviting me to be here today. It has been such a pleasure working with Karen and to get all of this set up. And Margie, thank you for making the initial connection. I really appreciate this opportunity. So what a day we had on yesterday. And I reflected a lot yesterday about this conversation that we are having today and how your work as the League of Women Voters is so important for our democracy, you know, for what we stand for here in the United States of America. And so I do want to share a presentation with you. Karen shared with me that you want to hear a lot about my experiences here in Bend or just, you know, in life. And I'm happy to talk about that. But I want to share some things with you that really have stuck in my mind since the events of yesterday. So I will share my screen with you. Well, my computer catches up. As Karen said, I am the director of the new Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Laboratory at OSU Cascades, as well as the program director of the Business Administration program. And I teach many classes in that program. Also, I'm the co-founder of Love Your Neighbor, and you'll see both logos there. So what is diversity, equity, and inclusion work all about? For me, and for many people that do this work, and you may have seen this graphic before, it's a very common graphic that's used with equity work, but equality, equity and liberation or justice are different things. And often when people are talking about social justice or doing social justice work, this is what they're referring to: removing the barrier that exists for everyone. You know, there are barriers that keep certain people out based on the systems that have been established in the United States. So when we look at equality, We see here 3 people trying to see a baseball game and they're being blocked by a fence. Well, you see with equality, it gives the same resources to everybody, whether or not you need the resources. A great example of that is the stimulus checks that have been given out by the government. I understand why everybody is receiving those funds. So I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. What I'm saying is that we might need a more equitable solution, like in the middle, where the people that need the most resources are receiving them. Not everyone has been out of work during the pandemic. Not everyone has lost their job during the pandemic. And while it might take a bit more work, the most resources should be given to the people that need them the most. However, the best solution is to remove the barrier. And when you think about structural systems or institutional racism or structural racism, it's the systems that we have in place, the healthcare system, the criminal justice system, the educational system that present these barriers. And usually those barriers impact marginalized groups more than they impact the majority of the population. And in thinking about that, talking about how different systems impact marginalized groups and they don't impact the majority, it gives the majority a privilege. So what is privilege? If you're familiar with Dr. Peggy McIntosh's work, she has an article called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. And she describes privilege as an invisible package of unearned assets, which one can count on cashing in on each and every day, but they might be largely oblivious to having those privileges or those assets. It's important to develop awareness of social identity groups to which you belong that might be associated with lower levels of status and therefore might result in the lack of access to certain privileges. So in learning about my experience here in Ben, I want to show you this video with Dr. Joy DeGruy, who she was a prominent faculty member at Portland State University for the majority of her career. She has since moved away from Portland, but I want to show you this video so you can see what a trip to the grocery store, something that we all, do or have done, and how that experience can be very different. So give me one moment to get this. I should have already had this pulled up, so my apologies for that, but I do this every day with classes, so just give me a moment.
My sister-in-law, who's half black, half white, but looks white, blue eyes, whiter than most white folks, very white. She and I, we kind of grew up together. We raised our children together. So they're first cousins, and it's the wonderful, very, very multicultural family. So we're going in a Safeway one day. And Kathleen, my sister-in-law, is in front of me. And she's, writing a check for her groceries. Now, my daughter, who at the time was 10 years old, was standing with me, and I was directly behind her, getting ready to get my groceries. So Kathleen comes up, and the checker, who is a strawberry blonde, freckled, very delightful, warm, the checker, this young woman, is talking to Kathleen. Hey, how you doing? Isn't it a nice day today? They're just chatting up, and says, yeah. So Kathy writes her check, and she steps off to the side with her groceries because she's waiting for me. Of course, again, Kathleen looks white, right? So I come up. No conversation. She looks up at me. Absolutely no, just little chatter. And I write my check. My daughter, however, is 10, notices immediately the difference in how she responds to me. So I write my check, And she goes, I'm going to need 2 pieces of ID. At which point my daughter looks at me and she gets very, very embarrassed, and tears are kind of coming up in her eye, like, Mommy, you're not gonna let her do this. Why is she doing this to us, right? So I'm trying to figure out what I should do, because behind me are 2 elderly white women, right? And I'm thinking, okay, so then I become the angry Black woman, right? And they're gonna be, and I'm just trying to second guess all the drama. So then I just give her the 2 pieces of ID. I said, some things you got to choose your battles, right? And then it gets worse. She pulls out the bad check book, right? So this is the book that shows the people who've written bad checks. So she starts searching for my license in the bad checks, at which point it's just out of control now. Just as I'm standing there trying to decide what to do, and it's really deeply humiliating. Now my daughter is in full-blown emotionally upset, who's 10. My sister-in-law walks back over, and she steps in and she says, excuse me, why are you doing this? And the checker goes, well, what do you mean? She goes, why are you taking her through all of these changes? Why are you doing that? She goes, well, this is our policy. She goes, no, it's not your policy, because you didn't do that with me. Oh, well, I know you've been, she goes, no, she's been here for years. I've only lived here for 3 months. And so at this point, the 2 white elderly ladies go, oh, I can't believe what this checker has done with this woman. It is totally unacceptable. At which point the manager walks over. So the manager walks over and says, is there a problem here? And then my sister-in-law again responds. She goes, yes, there is a problem here. Here is what happened. So you see, she used her white privilege. And even though Kathleen is half Black and half white, she recognizes what that means. And she made the statement. She pointed out the injustice. And she, as a result of that one act, influenced everyone in that space. But what would have happened? I can't know for certain had the Black woman said, this is unfair. Why are you doing this to me? Would it have had the same impact? But Kathleen knew that she walked through the world differently than I did. And she used her white privilege to educate and make right a situation that was wrong. That's what you can do every single day.
So what feelings come up for you after seeing that video?
Shock, anger.
Okay. Kim?
Injustice.
Injustice. Okay.
Deep sadness for me.
Just an undertone of anger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Pride in the fact that someone else stepped forward, because so often we're silent.
Exactly.
And then we're complicit.
That's right. Silence is complicity. Silence is saying nothing, is not acknowledging what's happening around you, and that can be harmful. So in thinking about the events of yesterday, let's consider what has happened in our nation this past year. So many different things. It feels like every day there's a crisis now, but so many things have impacted us. And I want to talk about the differences. So when you think about the examples of privilege and structural racism, so yesterday we had people storm the Capitol of the United States of America, where Congress was, the Senate, they were trying to make decisions and confirm the president. Well, we see people gathered on the steps of the Capitol. Now, during the summer, when it was thought that Black Lives Matter protesters might go to the Capitol, you see this picture in the middle here on the bottom, where the National Guard was called in, and they're in full military gear, waiting, ready for any protesters that might show up. You see people scaling the wall of the Capitol. And to me, from a psychological standpoint of human behavior, what in the world makes a person scale the wall of a building? So it was quite amazing to see that. And it made me think at that point, how if these people were Black or of color, their experience would be completely different, as we see with the pictures of protests during the summer. Black people being maced by police. There is an obvious problem here. And I don't know if you noticed today, right before this meeting, I was watching the president-elect name his Justice Department, or the leaders of the Justice Department. And he pointed out specifically the experience that they have in civil rights and social justice work and fighting for issues like this, doing police reform, understanding that there is a problem in this country with how minority groups or marginalized groups are treated by the police. 4 people died during yesterday's event. 1 was shot by I think the Secret Service. They haven't said, but I think by the Secret Service, but 1 was shot. And what we are saying as people of color is we didn't want to see a massacre on the Capitol yesterday. That's not what we wanted to see. What we want is for Black people to not die when they have a police interaction, just like white people cannot die when they have a police interaction. So most of the time in dealing with law enforcement, the experience can be very different for a person of color. I've been followed home by the police here in Bend. Not necessarily stopped or anything like that, but the police officer followed me all the way to my driveway. And it was a very fearful experience. I didn't know if I should pull into where I lived. I didn't know if I should just keep driving. I didn't know what to do. And I had my 15-year-old son with me. But I just came on home and thought, well, if he stops, then I can just get out and talk to him. I'll be at home and my kids are here. It'll be safer that way. We have to think through those situations. As Dr. DeGroot was saying, we think through the entire scenario of how this might play out when we are experiencing something that probably shouldn't be happening to us. And in thinking through how that's going to play out, we have to make a decision. Like she said, choose your battles. And we have to think about, how will this situation impact my career if I react? How will it impact my children? How might this make me look as a person? And for me personally, living here in a place where there are not a whole lot of people like me, I always think I have to be the absolute best representation of my race that I can possibly be, so that no one forms a negative opinion about my race. And that is an incredible burden to carry, walking through every single part of life. So when you think about my experience and what I deal with the most, it's microaggressions. I deal with these, I would say on average, about 3 to 4 of them per day, just in my professional life. And what are they? So they're subtle acts that show dominance, specifically when members of higher status groups behave in small ways, perhaps obviously, such that they effectively exert or reinforce dominance over members of a lower status group. So what the young lady did at the grocery store is an example of a microaggression. What I deal with most often is people questioning my qualifications, my credentials, my ability to lead. I have quite a few leadership roles at OSU-Cascades, and I'm questioned by colleagues all the time when I ask them to do something. They will say, well, maybe the dean should come and tell us to do that.
No problem.
I'm not sure if they realize it's what they're doing, but I see it and I feel it, and it happens at least 3 or 4 times a day. And it's to a point now that my boss, who is the dean, I will go to him and say, listen, I need you to tell so-and-so one more time, and he will do it. But it's sad that that's the case, that has to be done over and over and over until we can have some more training on microaggressions and how to handle them. And once he does it, then I am able to have more confidence. Once he tells these people, you know, Erika is in this role, please listen to her. It's as though I said it. If it comes from her, then I can exert, you know, I can have more confidence and authority in that leadership role. But it's sad that that has to be done when everyone is not treated that way. So some examples of how microaggressions occur, they're more likely to happen to women and members of minority groups, but we're likely to be interrupted while we're talking or talked over, especially like in meetings. Women and members of other kinds of minority groups are less likely to get credit for their ideas or suggestions. But how do we interrupt a microaggression? It's through a microaffirmation. So, and those are antidotes to the microaggression. So for example, if I'm in a meeting and I'm leading the meeting and I make a statement, maybe a colleague might say, well, you may need to get the dean to come in. And if another colleague said, no, you know, Erika said XYZ, so that's what we should do. That's an example of how to interrupt a microaggression and do it in a positive way where no one is offended. It doesn't create conflict, but it kind of affirms the position that the person that is experiencing the microaggression holds. Other examples of microaggressions that we can see here. So when it came a phenomenon with people calling the police on people of color for being in certain spaces, this is the first one that really made like national news. They dubbed her Barbecue Betty because she called the police on a group of Black men for barbecuing in a park. They were not doing anything illegal or wrong, but she felt that they shouldn't be there. And so she called the police. And now we've seen more and more instances of that happening around the country. The picture at the bottom, notice the young lady's hairstyle. Some states have had to pass laws in order for Black women to wear their natural hair. No one else, no other race has had to deal with that in the workplace. That is a huge microaggression, to police how someone wears their hair. And then the top picture on the right is a picture of women in leadership. And to the point that I just made about my own experience in the workplace, women in leadership often experience microaggressions as well. So I am a huge proponent of questions, and I'm gonna save the rest of the time for you to be able to ask me questions. I'm pretty much an open book and will share most anything with you, so please don't hesitate to ask anything that you may want to know. I will also show this slide to you though. because I'm here representing Love Your Neighbor and the DEI Lab. If you're interested in donating, here's the information on how to do that. And I can always give this information to Karen to share with you all as well. So, what questions do you have for me?
Thank you, Erika. I wanted to first mark the moment that we're in as we open up for questions. And we've been through a year that's been really traumatic for everybody with the pandemic, the loss of George Floyd and other people, protests, wildfires, elections, and then, like you and Carol both mentioned, the unprecedented events in the last 24 hours. You've mentioned for yourself the sort of the burden that you feel of always representing and always being your very best self, which is really hard for anyone to try to sustain that pressure. And I wanted to give you a moment to, talk about how you're doing and let us know your feelings.
Yeah. Yesterday was hard. It was hard to focus on work. It was hard to really get anything done because I was just kind of glued to the news and noticing just the stark differences in how other protests around the country and how people were treated versus how the people yesterday were treated, even down to how the media was referring to the groups of people and the names that the groups were called, protesters versus looters and rioters. Later in the evening, CNN started to change their language and use the same words to describe both groups. However, it took all day, for that to happen. And then to see on social media where people were posting their feelings about what happened and others would comment and say, no, it was BLM, it was Black Lives Matter people that were there. So even after seeing people with your own eyes, you still say it's Black people when that's not the case. We all saw the photos, we all saw the footage as it was happening live. There were some Black people mixed in the crowd, but that wasn't Black Lives Matter. And and Antifa is not an organization. And I get so tired of that miscommunication, that erroneous information. Antifa is not a group. It is not an organization. It means anti-fascism. It is not an organization. Right. So that's how I'm feeling right now. And I'm I saw on a friend's social media, she said, I wish I could call in Black today to her job and just say that it was a hard day for us to watch all of that unfold. We are, we're Americans too, and we care about our government, we care about our systems, and to see it happen and there be no real consequence, knowing that if it were people of color, there would have been a massacre on the Capitol yesterday. Hearing this morning, I heard the mayor of DC, who is a Black woman, give the explanation that she needs Congress to act so that she, as the mayor of Washington, DC, can call in the National Guard without having to have permission from the president. So people see the injustices, and it's just a matter of now waiting to see how they will be resolved.
There is a question in the chat that says, how can I use my own privilege to better help others, from Sammy?
Mm-hmm. Hi, Sammy. I know Sammy. The best way, instances, when you see something, say something, and it doesn't have to be angry. It doesn't have to be confrontational, just like the grocery store incident. You know, there are ways to interrupt racism or interrupt bias as things are happening that aren't putting yourself in harm's way. I experienced a situation here in the old mill when I first moved here, where I was called the N-word by a group of like 3 white men. They were next to this big truck and I was walking by and they said, "What are you doing here? You N-word." So I had a choice to make in that moment. I looked around, nobody was around, it was at night. And so I started checking for my safety. I looked in stores to see if I could see anybody, you know, still in the store working, and I did. And so but, you know, I had the thought of, do I respond to this? There are 3 of them, 1 of me. I don't know how far they're willing to go. And I have children to get home to. And so I remained quiet and I kept walking as though they weren't talking to me. But when I got to my car, I felt incredible shame and humiliation because I did not stand up for myself in that moment. However, I didn't do it so that I could remain safe. I didn't know. And this is a new area. So I just didn't know. And those types of experiences can have an impact on a person. But if other people had been around, you know, that night, what kind of support would I have wanted? I wouldn't want anyone to put themselves in harm's way to try to defend me, but to walk with me to my car is a way that you could use your privilege, you know, or just be friendly or kind in the moment, you know, can help. So it's really, when you see something and you're led to do it, say something. Because if you see something and you don't say something, as someone said earlier, you're complicit or non-confrontational.
I'm really happy you shared that story, Erika. I remembered you sharing it at the first Love Your Neighbor last February. And I think it really helps bring to all of our awarenesses what happens here in Bend when we think that it is pretty accepting, and you definitely witnessed the parts that aren't. The next question is from Kim Smith. Is there a way to teach ourselves what are and are not microaggressions? My daughter sees them so much easier than I do, which seem to be female generational.
Certainly the era that you grew up in, you know, when you grow up and it shapes your values and just your personal beliefs, that can influence what you see as being normal. My mom and my grandmother view things differently, you know, than I do. When I called my mom yesterday just to check on them in light of everything that's happening. And she was like, "Oh yeah, you know, it happened," like it wasn't a big deal, you know? And so I wondered if it was just because I'm so involved in this type of work that it impacted me completely differently, you know, from the way that it impacted them. I also told my mom about speaking. She still lives in Bruton, in the town that's about 40 miles from Monroeville. So she still lives there. And I was telling her about speaking to the group and that you all had read Just Mercy. And I had to explain to her what Just Mercy was all about and the book. And I explained that it's a shame that I didn't know that was going on when it was going on. And she said, "Well, you were a kid then, and rightfully, you know, so it was right for you not to know that was going on." But I disagree. I disagree now at this age, but had she told me at my age then, I might have had different priorities. I don't know. But it's just interesting the way that generations react to what's happening around us, you know, but spotting them, if something seems wrong, it probably is. you know? So if you hear someone say something to someone else or to you, and you're like, that doesn't quite sit right, or I wonder how they meant that, you know, then think it through. It could possibly be a microaggression.
Thank you, Erica.
Mhm.
So another question we have here from Greg Heacock is, do you have a role in training educators wanting to transform our education system to advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and a Black Lives Matter mindset?
I do work in education systems. Currently, I'm working with a few schools with the DEI lab. Sister School District is a district that I'm working in currently. And I am trying to secure some grant funding to be able to offer some more work to like Ben Lapine and other schools in Central Oregon, because the work is needed. However, it's, you know, money, you know, they don't have money to be able to devote to the resources. So to, if I can secure some grant funding, then I can offer those opportunities to the school systems as well.
I'm wondering if you could get funding in terms of providing interns from the schools to help in such programs, to provide tutoring, or whether
Oh, I
the
see.
college itself could present professional development sessions. What we see during this particular time of the pandemic with distance learning is that it's such a challenge for the educators, for the families, for the children, that it calls for the use of resources to advance our professional skills in terms of dealing with the curriculum. But the other is what I'm looking at as a teacher, a former teacher, besides all of the mistakes that I've made, would be, and learning from them, you know, afterwards, is that it is an assimilationist project to become part of the society that belongs, as opposed, and it's a top-down approach. It isn't anything that respects student agency. It's not an inquiry approach. It's rather getting you to know these things. And so it's essentially talking down to students. And I think it's one of the reasons that Black students don't perform very well on tests. It's like, who cares? Why in the world do I have to subject myself to a system that assumes that I'm not able to advance myself? And I need your help in order to know how to get the right question, the right answer. And my thought always is that if you're interested in the right answer, you're probably asking the wrong question. What do you have to say in terms of that? Would that be helpful? And is that something that you would be a good key person to communicate with in trying to get such funding to occur?
Yes, of course. Interns in schools or interns from schools.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I think that that is certainly something that I would be interested in helping out with and needed. Your comment about Black people performing well on tests, you know, it goes back to that graphic with equality, equity, and liberation. I don't think it's the person, I think it's the test.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that when we look at tests like the ACT, SAT, or the GMAT, GRE, those tests that are required to get into grad school, or the tests required to get into college, resources are required in order to be able to do well on those tests. Parents that know that an ACT is even required to get into college are necessary, or going to a school that has a guidance counselor that will help prepare you to college. All of that is resource-based. And if you are able to live in a neighborhood where you can go to a great school, then you might have those resources. If your parents can afford a tutor for you to do better on an exam or a test, then you know you'll have better opportunities. And so I think historically, as far as people of color with standardized testing, that's the barrier. not necessarily a desire to not want to do well, but the ability to have access to do well.
Right. To understand the test itself and even how it's shaped and
That's right.
what determines the right answer, the wrong answer, and all
Right.
the rest. Yes.
Right.
And is there a way to educate parents too? Would that be something else that the college could engage in?
Oh,
Because I
yes.
think that's part of what is a problem throughout Oregon, no matter what color anyone is that you don't have books in the home, you don't know what the curriculum is, you're not too sure how to help your kid. And if English isn't your first language, then it's surprising to me that there's not more attempt to educate people in an ESL way for parents.
Right.
Empower
Right.
them. Yeah.
Right. I think that is valuable. And one barrier that I see here, and I didn't see it as much in Alabama as I see it out here, is this notion that there are other ways to become educated beyond going to school. Like you can read enough to have the equivalent knowledge of a person with a college degree, and that should be sufficient. Employers should want that. However, I've never had an employer to ask me, how much do you read? They say a college degree is required. So I think that we have to do that work to propose the value of education all over again. I know that happens, that has to happen. It seems like every so often we have to have these conversations about the value of an education and what an education can give you. And I think we have to do it now, even younger than we had to do it before.
Yeah. Yeah. Education ends at high school. Yeah.
Right.
You're
Right.
I have
There
a
are
question.
more comments that I'll move on to. Chico Fraley did mention that he had a similar experience as you did, Erica, in the old mill. And he actually confronted the individual and they drove away, which sounds pretty scary. I would be very scared in that situation.
Yeah. You want to talk about that, Chico?
Well, and as a Black male in Central Oregon, I've been here for just over 21 years. And it was very frustrating for me to go through that to that event, because I was actually dropping off my daughter and a teenage friend to do some shopping. And luckily I was walking with them and they'd gone into the store when this interaction happened, and a guy in a lifted white beat up truck with a Confederate flag drove by and stopped and started yelling at me. And I'm a large gentleman, so I asked him to get out of the car. And that was, as my wife later told me, was not very smart, because we have no idea what he had in the vehicle or not. But it was a fatherly protection and an anger that riled up. And I was able to do that because of my stature. And I grew up with a military dad that kind of ingrained in me that if there's certain things that you're willing to fight for, and that was one of them. I'm glad I didn't, because if things would have happened differently, I probably would have gotten arrested and I would have had to deal with the things that came from that. But it broke my heart. And the fact that my youngest daughter witnessed it, the wife and I cried over that night.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, Chico, you had to go through that. It's very scary. Weighing out how to respond and weighing what might happen if you respond. You're just never sure what's going to happen.
Right.
I'll move on to a question. I'm hoping that I pronounced the name right, Raya Fenewald. In today's environment where much of our social and opportunities are occurring online, what advice do you have to get to know people of color in our community specifically? I'm a Filipino American woman. In pre-pandemic, we used to have picnics and get-togethers, and I am having a hard time in this environment of finding a pandemic equivalent.
I'm sorry that for me, it took a while to build community of people of color. If I go about pre-pandemic, if I go about my daily routine of just going to work and home and maybe to the grocery store or whatever, you never see people of color. And it's just you, and it's such an isolating feeling. I can't imagine if I didn't have my kids at home, what my life would be like to just be me living here. It would be completely isolating. And I felt isolated before I knew other people. It takes time and it takes effort. So even though we are in a pandemic, you know, people that you may have met at picnics or that you do have community with, just do Zoom events where you can get together and see one another and just talk, especially with events like yesterday. It really helps to have a community that you can go to and talk to. So it takes effort and it takes time and patience. So just stick with it. It will get better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that many of us who have moved from other places that had more diverse communities actually miss that ourselves and find it hard recreating a community like that within our social networks here in Bend. I wanted to move on to Jerry Hauser's question. She said, do you have suggestions how our local league can grow diversity in our membership?
If I had $1 for every time I'm asked that question, there is no magic sauce. You know, there's no way to just snap your fingers and there be a ton of diverse people that are waiting, you know, to join all the boards and all the organizations. What you can do is be welcoming, be inclusive as you are now. Earlier, Greg mentioned assimilation, and assimilation is not inclusion. People should be able to be their individual selves and not have to assimilate to what they think your organization is about. You know, so clearly messaging what your organization is, what you do, what you advocate for, and check your wording and just make sure that it's inclusive and open to everyone. Are you saying things or marketing things that might be a turnoff to diverse groups? So just really looking at everything you do through that lens of being inclusive and welcoming to everyone. And then once you get that first person, you know, that's willing to be a part of your group, other people will see that that person is there, and then it'll grow from there. People really like to see people that look like them represented in organizations.
Yeah, thanks, Erica, because I think recently our membership was, the average person was a, you know, white woman about 75 years old. And so, and also, you know, I think a lot of us, you know, weren't even aware of some of the, you know, the racist parts of suffrage itself and the beginnings of the league. And so I know the National League is working on DEI a lot, so we have reached out to the Latino Community Association, so anyway, thank you.
Sure,
I
sure.
would like to comment that, Erica, this is a challenge that not only diversity of people of color, but also welcoming of people of another political party. We are seen as white women Democrats, and we struggle with that. We are supposed to be nonpartisan. And so I think that your comments are going across the field in many ways.
Okay, great.
Is there anyone else who would like to unmute themselves and ask questions of Erika or make any comments on what she has said or other people have said?
Yeah. Just what is your work in general on the campus? What do you find yourself doing during the day? What are your responsibilities and what are your accomplishments?
Well, gosh, what do I find myself doing most of the day? Meeting. I meet back to back a lot throughout the day. I teach, and honestly, you know, I won't ever give that up, because I have a passion for preparing young minds that are going to go out into this world and manage other people. And I want, I went into management because I had been working at the time and I had experience with horrible managers. And I thought, this could be a lot better than it is. And so I really put the rubber to the road, as they say, and or put my money where my mouth was, and got educated on how to train them. And so that's what I'm passionate about doing. I also run the lab, and in doing that, I get to work within organizations in the community to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And in turn, that influences the community, because the knowledge that I'm giving these organizations, they are taking with them out into the community, to their homes. They're having conversations about this work. And it is, that's my way of making a difference here. I'm a member of some boards, and so I contribute to the community that way. And with Love Your Neighbor, I really want to bring people of color to the forefront so that they have an opportunity to be seen and heard by the majority in the community. People need to know that we're here, that we are working every day, and we have children that go to school, and we're just normal people that have chose to live here in Bend, Oregon, or in Central Oregon, and to hear from us and learn what our experiences are so that we can have a greater impact on our community. And so it's the same, 2 or 3 people aren't always asked to serve on boards and be a part of things, just to bring other people to the surface as well. So that's where I have my hands in a whole lot of different things, but it's very exciting and fulfilling. I am tremendously blessed to have been here for 3 years and have all this opportunity to impact the community. I take it very seriously, and any way that I can help to make a difference, I will do that.
I see that there was a comment from Julie. Julie, did you have a comment or question for Erika?
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for talking with us. I have a comment, and I've only lived here 6 months. I began seriously examining myself and my privilege after the George Floyd murder. And I've been in several online national forums, discussion groups, trainings on diversity. And I just want to say, the longer I examine myself, the more ignorant I realize I am, and the more shocked I am by how I have unwillingly contributed to certainly not helping diminish the problems around diversity and differences. I also just want to say thank you for your very gracious speaking with us. You are very articulate and eloquent and patient. Thank you. And then my question was to find out more about Love Your Neighbor. You just described it, so I appreciate that. And I assume if I Google it, I can find out more.
Yes, you can. Yes, we have Facebook page, and we're on social media, but feel free to, if you have any questions, you can email me and I'm happy to talk with you. Normally, pre-pandemic, I would always say I'm always available for a cup of coffee or a glass of wine, but we can't really do that now. But if we ever get back to a sense of normalcy, I'm always available. And Margie can tell you that I will happily have dialogue anytime.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Erica, I have one more question for you. It was interesting at the Love Your Neighbor forum that was in person downtown about a year ago. You expressed what I thought I heard, some concerns about woke culture and anti-racism. And I think that people, kind of want to be supportive and don't know exactly what the right way is. But I was wondering if you could talk more about that comment, since I had wondered about it. And now we have you here in person and I can ask you.
Sure. So there are many ways to do this work, which is, when I say this work, social justice work, there are many ways to do it. I choose to do it in love. I meet people where they are. I don't fault people for what they don't know. And when I say I meet people where they are, so that we can grow together, we can learn from each other and grow together. There are others that are angry about the situation or the injustices that they see. And instead of, and they feel that the majority of the population should be doing more themselves, to try to learn and to try to grow on their own. They don't feel it's their responsibility to educate. And it comes off as anger. It comes off as aggression. So when I say woke culture, it's the people that wag their finger in your faces and say, you should already know this. Well, how can you know it? I spend a lot of time interviewing people with my work, and most people that I've come across in Central Oregon, if they were born here, they haven't left, other than maybe to go to U of O or OSU or Eastern Oregon. They've gone to college, but they come back and they settle here. This is all they know. And if all you know is a community that's 90+% white, how can we expect you to even think about social justice when that's not a part of your daily life? You only know what about other people from what you see on television, because there's certainly not a lot of people living here. So how can we blame people for that? At least that's the way that I approach it, but there are others that don't. And so in my mind, the woke culture can do harm, because I feel like sometimes white people are left with, what in the world what am I supposed to be doing? This person says do it this way, but this other person of color says to do it this way. But this group says to do it this way. You check out then, and you're confused, and you just don't know what to do, so you don't do anything. And there are, I've tried to make efforts with the other activist groups in the community to come together and do better about that, but it turned into an all-out attack on me. And so I have kind of just withdrawn from that part of the work, but I will continue to do the work that I do to try to make the difference that I can make in the community. So just, especially before you give your dollars, don't ever give your dollars out of guilt. Research organizations, make sure you agree with their tactics and their mission and what they plan to do. Make sure they have a plan to do something with your money, before you give your dollars. Really research and make sure that you agree with what you're giving to.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. I really like the kindness of your approach and how you approach things with loving, because that definitely comes across in your personality in this presentation, Zoom presentations, in-person presentations. We're now at a little past 1 o'clock, and I know you're very busy with a teaching schedule, so I want to give you an out. I do have a slide that I included because one of the newspaper articles that you had written was don't ask me what I can do, because you obviously get asked to take responsibility for that. So I do have a slide that I can put up. And again, like you have just said, do your homework and research the organization to see if it matches your values. And I also have a slide to share about some of the upcoming presentations so that people will know what is happening next month and for several more months.
Great. Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. I do have a 1 o'clock meeting that I'm late to.
Okay.
So thank you so much for
Thank you.
inviting me today. And please know that you can call on me anytime. I will be happy to come back.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Erica.
Thank you.
Yeah, we love
Thanks.
you.
You all have a
Thank
great
you.
day.